Let's use the Taxonomy browser. Okay, so the Taxonomy browser, in a nutshell, allows you to go ahead and understand sort of where different organisms are on the tree of life. And for those who have never heard of how taxonomy works, which for whatever reason it's a fuck ton of people, we have what's called a nested hierarchy. And the reason a fucking nested hierarchy is important to understand is because the further down you go in the hierarchical classification, the more you narrow things out. And what people need to understand about these rankings is that every organism belongs to a very large number of different rankings that are not mutually exclusive. For example, humans are not only primates, they are mammals, they are vertebrates, and they're eukaryotes. Well, that makes perfect sense when you understand that there are a very small number of things that you have to be called a eukaryote, and you add on to that as you go down the line, so that some of the lower rankings, like primate and genus Homo, you have to have super specific characters that set you aside from other things. Okay, if that makes any sense. You know, everything's a living organism, and then we get into our domains, which there are three: eukarya, bacteria, and archaea. And which means that if something is considered eukarya, no matter what any of these other rankings are called, it will still qualify as a fucking eukaryote, okay? Now, the reason I'm saying this is because we have this wonderful taxonomy browser that even includes things like viruses that scientists such as myself are not actually settled on whether or not they qualify as living organisms to begin with. Now, remember, you can use taxonomy to classify things that are not living organisms, but we're worried about binomial nomenclature and biological taxonomy. So anyway, somebody seems a little bit confused as to whether or not fungus qualifies as an insect. So, here's an insect. This is the moth Durapsomyron. It is a sphingid in the subfamily Macroglassinae. Now, we'll talk about all that in just half a second, but you can go on your taxonomy browser for a wide range of species. Now, you're not going to get like this taxonomy browser does have genetic codes and things like that for some species. You're not going to get that for every species because we haven't really sequenced the genome of every darn species, but you can at least the most up-to-date so far taxonomic placement of things. I probably should have been careful not to talk about a Lepidopteran just because of how Lepidoptera taxonomy has kind of fallen apart in the last couple of years. But in any case, so Durapsomyron is cellular, like all living organisms, right? It's a eukaryote, and the reason Durapsomyron is a eukaryote has to do with its cell structure, okay? It just means that the cells contain membrane-bound organelles. The DNA is arranged in chromosomes that are usually taking the form of chromatin in a nucleus, things like that. Now, I want to just preface this. There are a wide range of other taxonomic rankings aside from these 8. As anybody who has done anything aside from basic biology knows, biology is far from basic. Like, we will teach people this in an intro-level course because we're not going to possibly get into every cladistic ranking something can fit in. There's superfamilies, there's subfamilies, there's infraorders, superorders, suborders, all that other shit, and it's great for scientists, especially in large groups like the Lepidoptera, and, especially with large families like Erebidae. Well, what the fuck does that mean to me if I'm studying something on one side of the Erebid family tree and you're studying something on the other side of the Erebid family tree? So a lot of times people will stipulate the subfamily when they're talking about Erebids. They typically don't worry about the subfamily for smaller families because the subfamily rank can be arbitrary or it isn't. It just, again, depends on how big the fucking group you're working with is. You don't necessarily stipulate what suborder or what subfamily or taxonomic tribe most things belong to, unless it's part of a massive family like the Erebidae, where, 10% of described lepidopterans are in that family, then it makes sense. But I digress. Now, I'm not here to convince you that this is a type of insect. I really, if you come and say, well, what if Girapsamyron's really not an insect? Well, that's for you to work out, babe, okay? I'm sorry, I can't help you there. Anyway, I also have a taxonomy tab open for something that I'm hoping everybody can recognize is actually a mushroom. This isn't some obscure Basidiomycete. This is magic mushroom, okay, people? Now, the reason I'm here is because the buck stops at this taxonomic ranking known as Opisthokonta. That just has to do with the mitochondria. It's just telling us that this is a very specific endosymbiotic cellular we don't have to worry too much about that if we don't want to, okay? It just has to do with the type of endosymbiont the cells of this particular eukaryote line have. And that does happen to include the animals and the fungi, yes. Technically, we're considered heteroconts, which I believe is just another word for that. But in any case, that is where the similarities between an insect and a fungus, like a mushroom, end. Here, this is fungus. This is animal. Metazoa right there, okay? So, metazoa is going to contain everything that we would call an animal. Eumetazoa here is going to contain everything that has tissue type differentiation, so everything except for the, I believe, jellyfish and sponges. Bilaterally symmetric animals, they're protostomic. They are ecdysozoans, which means they shed their skin, and all these other rankings. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because in order to be a Girapsa, you not only have to have every feature that would make you a macroglossine, every feature that would make you an insect, every feature that would make you a hexapod, every feature that would make you a eukaryote. And it's cool because all Girapsamyron are eukaryotes, but very few eukaryotes are Girapsamyron, right? Even though, as you go down this set of particular, and this, there's so many different taxonomic ranks because of how many life forms exist. But somebody had made the claim that because you see in the cell wall of something like a mushroom and other fungi, all fungi have chitin in their cell walls. That is what's known as an anapomorphy, or a feature that sets the organism's category apart from others. They have a cell wall that's chitinous. So, on that point, before we wrap up, a chemical is not necessarily an indicator of a taxonomic ranking, especially if it's a structural chemical that can be very easily synthesized by the organism. How they use it and where they put it might be a little bit more important. And in our case, insects don't have cell walls, and that's the key feature here that you have to be aware of. In order to be an animal, your cells cannot contain cell walls. In order to be a fungus, your cells have to contain cell walls. Okay, that's an anapomorphy. Now, cell wall itself would be considered a synapomorphy. It's something that you can see passed down. So, a lot of eukaryotes, actually, the majority of eukaryotes have cell walls. Okay, we animals are in the minority, actually, as far as eukaryotic organisms that lack cell walls. Very few eukaryotic organisms lack cell walls, okay?